Welcome to Infinite Universe with more interesting episode. Lieutenant Riley Beer had spent more than 10 years serving in the U.S. Coast Guard, and he had seen many tense and dangerous situations. But this day wasn't supposed to be like those. It was meant to be calm, just a routine patrol over the Pacific Ocean. The mission was straightforward: fly over a familiar route that passed near a small, remote island called Peklot Island. This island was located around 160 miles northeast of the main Yap Islands. Known for its natural beauty and complete isolation, it was rarely visited by anyone. People didn't live there, and there were no tourist activities or settlements. It was just untouched land in the middle of nowhere. As Riley slightly adjusted the flight path of the aircraft, it glided smoothly over the peaceful waters and the lonely island. The coastline stretched below them, white sand separating the blue ocean from the sky. Everything looked quiet and empty, just the way it always did. But suddenly, Riley noticed something that didn't fit the calm scenery. There was a slight flicker of movement, barely noticeable, near the trees on the island. At first, he thought it could be something natural, maybe a bird or just a trick of the light. But then, as they flew a little closer, he saw it clearly: letters carved into the sand, large and urgent. It was an SOS, a desperate message scratched into the beach. "Look at that," Riley said sharply to his co-pilot, Lieutenant Justin Dewey. He pointed down toward the beach. "That's an SOS. Someone's in serious trouble down there." Justin leaned forward and stared at the ground. His eyes widened as he saw the same thing. That's not just someone goofing around. They're stranded. Maybe worse. Riley quickly adjusted the controls, slowing the helicopter and guiding it lower as they started circling the island. "We need to report this and get a rescue team in the air," he said. "But first, let's take a better look. See who's down there and what we're dealing with." Justin nodded and grabbed the radio, starting to prepare the emergency message. As the aircraft dipped lower, the movement Riley had seen earlier became clearer. He now saw what it was. People. Real people. Not animals or shadows. There were human beings on the island. "Guys, take a look at this," Riley said, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was beating fast. There weren't supposed to be people here. Peklot Island was considered uninhabited. As they flew even lower, Riley's heart sank. On the beach, 3 people were waving their arms wildly. A woman and 2 men. Even from above, Riley could see they were extremely thin, their clothes torn and dirty. Their movements were desperate, like they had been holding on to hope for a long time and were now finally seeing a way out. There was an old, damaged boat pulled up on the shore, partly buried in the sand. Riley gasped. "God, no. They look like they've been here forever." The Coast Guard helicopter continued to circle slowly as Riley, Justin, and the rest of the crew took in the heartbreaking scene. The 3 people on the island looked like they had barely survived. Their bodies looked weak, their clothes were almost rags, and they kept trying to get the helicopter's attention. It was clear they had been stranded there for a very long time. Riley's shock was quickly replaced with a strong sense of duty. These people needed help right away. They couldn't wait another day. But as he looked toward the horizon, he saw something that made the situation even more dangerous. The sky, which had been clear earlier, was now getting dark. Thick, heavy clouds were forming quickly and heading toward them. A storm was coming. Justin noticed it too. "Riley, we've got a problem. There's a storm coming in fast from the southwest," he said, checking the radar. "It's moving quickly. Looks like it could get pretty bad." "How long do we have?" Riley asked, though he could already guess the answer. Justin looked at the radar again. "Maybe 30 minutes, if that. If we don't leave soon, we'll be stuck in it." Riley knew what that meant. The castaways needed to be rescued, but the helicopter wouldn't be able to land safely on the island in bad weather. The wind was already picking up, making it difficult to control the aircraft. The waves around the island were also growing bigger, so landing in the water was not an option either. And the storm was coming so fast that no backup helicopters or rescue boats could be sent out in time. "The rescue winch isn't safe in this wind," Riley said, thinking out loud. "If we try to lower a rope to pull someone up, we might lose control." The wind could blow someone into the ocean or even crash them against the helicopter. We need to drop emergency supplies, he decided. They need food, water, and a radio so we can talk to them. Then we come back for them after the storm passes. The crew quickly went to work. They packed a bundle with emergency items, food, bottled water, basic medical supplies, and a two-way radio. They secured everything tightly so it wouldn't break on impact. Riley carefully lowered the aircraft, trying to find a flat section of beach where they could drop the package. When the bundle hit the sand, the three castaways rushed forward and tore it open. They clung to the supplies as if it was the only hope they had left. Riley grabbed his microphone and called out through the radio. "Can you hear us?" There was a short delay, then a weak voice replied, trembling with emotion. "We hear you. Thank you. Please help us." "This is the U.S. Coast Guard," Riley said, trying to sound calm even though he felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. "We're here to help, but there's a storm coming in fast. We have to go back to base, but we'll return as soon as the weather clears. You've got food, water, and medical supplies now to get you through the night." There was silence, just static, and then the same voice came back. It sounded desperate and scared. "No, don't leave us. Please. We've been here for 33 days. We're eating whatever we can catch, rats, crabs. We've only had rainwater to drink. Rita, she's not doing well. Her blood sugar is very low. Please don't leave us." Riley felt a tight knot in his chest. He hated what he had to say next. "We don't have a choice," he said slowly. "The storm is almost here. If we don't leave now, we won't be able to get back at all. We promise we will come back for you." The wind outside was now howling. The helicopter began to shake from the force of the storm winds. Riley looked down and saw the castaways stumble in the sand as the first drops of rain began to fall. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the sky turned a deep, dark gray. "Riley, we have to go," Justin said urgently. "We won't be able to fly if we wait any longer. We'll lose visibility, and the winds are getting worse." Riley hesitated. He kept looking down at the people below, holding on to the supplies like they were their last hope. It tore him apart to leave them behind. But he knew that staying meant risking everyone's life. He finally turned the aircraft away from the island, his eyes locked on the scene below until it disappeared behind the wall of dark clouds. Heavy rain poured down seconds later, making it impossible to see the ocean beneath them. The helicopter rocked and lurched as Riley and the crew flew back toward Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, nearly 500 miles away. Riley couldn't stop thinking about what he had just seen. Those three people waving at him, begging for help, their voices filled with fear. He kept hearing them over and over in his head. The storm had made it impossible to rescue them right away, but that didn't make it feel any better. He didn't just feel like he'd failed a mission. He felt like he'd left fellow human beings behind in their darkest moment. It wasn't only the danger of the storm that haunted him. It was the look in their eyes. The way they reached up at the helicopter as if it was the only thing keeping them from disappearing forever. The knowledge that they had been there for over a month, 33 days, surviving on whatever they could find. Drinking rainwater. Eating rodents and bugs. Building a shelter out of debris. Watching for ships and planes, hoping someone would find them. Now they finally had a chance at being rescued. But nature had intervened with violent power. The weather had made that one hope impossible, at least for now. Riley knew the moment they landed back at the base, a rescue mission would be planned. He'd make sure of it. They couldn't let those three people wait any longer than they already had. He would push for the fastest possible return. He wouldn't rest until they were brought back safely. As the helicopter flew through the dark, rain-soaked skies, the only thing Riley could do was focus on getting his crew back to base alive so they could come back for the others. They had seen the SOS. They had made contact. Now, it was a race against time to save 3 lives still clinging to hope on a forgotten island. And that hope now rested on the shoulders of the people who had found them, just in time. The only small comfort Riley felt that night was knowing they had left behind enough supplies to help the castaways survive until morning. Even though they couldn't rescue them right away, they had done what they could for now. More search patrols and support helicopters were already being prepared to return the next day. Everyone knew time was critical, but they had to wait for the right moment to safely bring the castaways home. About 3 hours later, the aircraft finally landed back at their base. As the wheels touched the ground, heavy rain began beating against the airfield windows. The storm had arrived. Riley climbed out of the cockpit and felt the cold wind cutting across his face. It was sharp, biting, and relentless. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, but the chill wasn't just from the weather. Something deeper was troubling him. Even though he was back on solid ground, Riley couldn't rest. He lay in bed wide awake, staring into the darkness, thinking over and over about the 3 people still stranded on that lonely island. Somewhere out there, far from comfort and safety, 3 lives were clinging to survival, enduring the storm completely alone. They had already suffered so much. Now they had to spend another terrifying night exposed to the cold wind, the rain, and the darkness. Riley couldn't stop seeing the haunting image in his mind, the gaunt, thin faces of the castaways waving their arms in desperation as the helicopter first flew over them. How had they lasted this long in such a cruel and unforgiving place? The radio communication earlier had made it clear how serious the situation was. The castaways were weak, dehydrated, and starving. They had been exposed to harsh weather for too long, and their bodies were barely holding on. Riley imagined the nightmare they must have lived through, every day a struggle to find just enough food or water, every night a battle to stay warm and alive. He thought about the constant fear they must have felt as each sunset brought more uncertainty. What if rescue never came? How long could they survive like this? After returning to base, Riley sat with his team to go over what they had seen. The crew listened closely as he described the condition of the castaways, how thin they were, how weak they looked, how hopeless their eyes seemed. Justin, one of the crew members, shook his head in disbelief. He couldn't understand how those people had survived this long. The heat, the dehydration, the lack of clean water, it would have been enough to break most people. But somehow, these 3 had held on. The Coast Guard immediately made new plans. They would send helicopters to keep a watch on the island overnight, just in case anything changed. More emergency supplies would be dropped if needed. And at first light the next morning, they would launch a full rescue mission. Everyone on the team knew the goal: get those people off that island as soon as possible, before it was too late. That night, Riley couldn't rest. Lying in his bunk, he tossed and turned, haunted by what he had seen. He couldn't stop thinking about how the castaways had survived all this time. What had kept them going? Was it hope? Was it desperation? Maybe it was just the raw, stubborn instinct to live. Whatever it was, they had managed to keep themselves alive through one of the most brutal tests a human can face. Riley imagined them on the island, watching the skies, praying that someone would come. Every time a cloud passed over the sun, every time the wind changed, they must have wondered, is today the day we're rescued, or the day we die? At some point in the middle of the night, Riley gave up trying to sleep. He got up, threw on his coat, and walked outside to the airfield. The wind had calmed a little, but the air still felt cold and heavy. In the distance, he saw a helicopter returning from another supply drop. Its lights blinked in the dark, and the sound of its rotors echoed across the field. The pilot stepped down, looking tired and worn out. His face was drawn with worry. "They're hanging in there," the pilot said quietly. "But just barely. We need to get them out first thing in the morning." Riley nodded. He could feel the urgency in every word. Time was running out. The terrain on that island was rough and unforgiving. The castaways were too weak to move far on their own. Any delay could mean the difference between life and death. The rescue had to be perfect. Every detail needed to go exactly right. The next morning, the weather improved just enough to make the rescue possible. The sky was still grey, but the winds had settled, and visibility was better. Riley and his crew climbed into the helicopter and lifted off, flying low over the choppy sea. Waves crashed below them, and the wind pushed hard against the aircraft, but they pressed on. Riley's hands were tight on the controls, his nerves tense as they neared the island. When they finally reached Picket Island, the scene below was heartbreaking. In the harsh morning light, the castaways looked even weaker than before. Their skin was pale, their eyes hollow, and their clothes hung in loose tatters from their bodies. Riley's chest ached as he saw the woman step forward. She moved slowly, unsteadily, as though every step took all the energy she had left. The helicopter hovered in place, and the crew lowered a winch with a rescue harness. The first man clung to it, his hands trembling with exhaustion. As he was lifted into the air, his limbs barely moved. By the time he reached the helicopter, his breathing was shallow, and his whole body shook with relief and weakness. The crew gently pulled him inside and laid him down. Next came the woman. Riley watched closely, heart pounding. She struggled to fit herself into the harness. Her movements were uncoordinated and sluggish, and it was clear she was fading fast. The crew lowered the winch even more carefully for her. When she was finally lifted, her body looked weightless, like a fragile leaf caught in the wind. As she floated up toward the helicopter, Riley could hardly breathe. She seemed suspended between life and death. The moment she was brought inside, medics rushed to her. They checked her vital signs and began giving her emergency treatment right away. The last man was the hardest to bring up. He was barely able to stay upright in the harness, and his body swayed dangerously as he rose. When he finally reached the helicopter floor, he collapsed completely. His eyes were red and distant, but a small, broken smile appeared on his face. In a hoarse whisper, he said just one word, "Thank you." The helicopter raced back toward the coast, carrying the 3 survivors. Riley stayed close, watching over them as the medics worked. The woman was in the worst shape, her breathing was shallow, and her pulse was barely detectable. The medics gave her glucose to help raise her blood sugar and monitored her closely. The 2 men lay on stretchers, sipping water slowly, their strength returning bit by bit. One of the men, his voice still raspy, tried to explain what had happened. "We got caught in a storm," he said. "Lost most of our fuel trying to get through it. After that, we just drifted. We thought it was the end." Riley listened and nodded. His face was grim. "You're safe now. We're getting you to a hospital." As the coastline appeared in the distance, everyone in the helicopter felt a wave of relief. The worst was over. Help was near. When they landed at the medical facility, doctors and nurses rushed out to meet them. Riley helped carry the stretchers inside. He couldn't take his eyes off the woman. She looked like she might slip away at any moment. But one of the doctors gave him a reassuring nod. "She's stable. It's a miracle she made it through." In the days that followed, the castaways slowly began to recover. They were placed in hospital beds, given food, fluids, and warmth. Riley visited them as often as he could. He wanted to hear their story, to understand how they had survived something so terrible. The details came slowly. The 3 of them had set sail from a place called Pulet, heading toward Pula Bettus, in a small 23-foot boat. But then the weather changed. A storm rolled in unexpectedly. They lost fuel trying to power through it, and before they knew it, they were off course. The sea carried them farther and farther away. Eventually, they landed on a tiny, uninhabited place called Pellet Island, more than 125 miles from where they had started. There was nothing there. No shelter. No clean water. No food. Just rocks, trees, and silence. At first, they panicked. But then they pulled themselves together. They built a rough shelter from whatever they could find. They caught fish, searched for edible plants, and gathered rainwater. Every day was a fight to stay alive. Sometimes they would go 2 or 3 days with almost nothing to eat. Sometimes the rain didn't come, and they had to ration the little water they had. The woman had gotten weaker with each passing week, and the 2 men took turns caring for her, feeding her first, even when they were starving. Riley listened, stunned by their courage. He realized their survival wasn't just about physical strength. It had come from somewhere deeper, from the will to live, from love, from refusing to give up. Even when things looked hopeless, they had held on to each other. That had made all the difference. Meanwhile, the U.S. Border Patrol continued investigating how the castaways had ended up so far from their original route. Were they migrants? Were they lost travelers? There were still questions to answer. But for Riley, those details didn't really matter. What mattered was that 3 people were alive today because someone saw them waving from a forgotten island and chose to act. Riley and his crew had been there when they were needed most. That was enough. The memory of the rescue would stay with Riley forever. He would always remember the sight of those frail figures waving with everything they had left. They had been on the edge of death, but they had held on long enough to be found. That image would live in his heart, a reminder of how powerful the human spirit can be. Sometimes, the smallest signs, like a desperate wave from an island that no one thought was inhabited, can lead to the most incredible acts of courage. This was more than just a rescue story. It was a story about survival, hope, and the strength of people who refused to give up. If you were in their place, alone on an island for weeks with no food or help, do you think you could have survived? Why or why not? It's a question that makes us all reflect on what we're capable of when everything is on the line. Thank you for reading, and remember, sometimes, even in the darkest moments, a small light can shine through and change everything. Thanks for watching. Keep it and stay tuned. Like and subscribe our channel. Have a good day.